But like the ocean, it gives you peace, so will my program.
To get from you a little bit more of your inspiration that
Governments that are involved, we've been able to form an environmental working group.
Issue of equal opportunities in terms of sharing department on energy. We have invested approximately or given aid. USAID has given an aid of $1.9 million to this project. Good evening and welcome to Peace of My Mind. As always, we have beautiful topics for you and beautiful guests. Today I have the pleasure of having Professor Sarah Oluko with me, who is a professor in anthropology, I believe.
Anthropologist by training, but I taught sociology of education in the university.
She's going to be talking to me tonight about child abuse and child labor. In fact, one of the things about the African child, which concerns me and concerns most of the people on Peace of My Mind, is that the fact that the African child seems to be going backwards in the levels of education and in the child rights, which are supposed to be his or hers by virtue of them being a child. And that concerns the future for Africa, the value system for Africa. Professor Oluko, what do you see as the way forward for the African child? Like I said, there's a lot of demands on the African child in terms of survival rather than education. And this takes away rather than adds.
Well, thank you. Obviously, the way forward would be for the government and the whole of civil society to respect the provisions of the two international instruments that several countries, including Nigeria, have signed and ratified. These are the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and the African Charter on the Welfare and Rights of the Child. These two documents contain several provisions centered around four key principles, those of survival, development, protection, participation. So these provisions were well known, respected, implemented, and enforced. Then we imagine that the welfare of the African child would be more enhanced than it is now. But what you have now is that most people don't know the rights, let alone try to enforce it. So what is going on is for governments to recognize, get people trained in rights education, rights sensitization, so that the children themselves will know their rights and demand their rights, okay, in a polite African way from those who they relate to, or otherwise their role partners. That is the way forward.
Okay. Child labor. That seems to be a major issue. And is there any getting away from it? Because it's from running from kids who are selling pure water on the streets to kids who are running their parents' shops and not being able to go to school, or especially somewhere like in the eastern part of Nigeria where 95%, or I like to put it as high as that, but I'll be nice enough to say 70% of the male child is into trading rather than education, and they start very early. Or the domestic help, which you now get, who is 5 years old and is coming to carry a child of 2.
Yeah.
How do we move forward? Are there no laws against child labor?
There are. The Child Rights Act, which was enacted in 2003, Section 28, has provisions against child labor. By that act, no child can actually, that any person under 18, can act as domestic help in a third-party household. But then what do you see? You have millions of them, in cities throughout the federation. So that's one area that can be addressed. You see, child labor is a whole continuum. Children have always worked in traditional African society, but we make distinctions between work and labor. Work are those activities that foster the child's development, self-esteem, that enhance the child's participation to his own domestic economy, whereas labor is exploitative work. It usually involves some hazards and work that is inimical to a child's other physical development, social development, moral development, and cognitive development. So there's a difference. When you talk about child labor, I remember when I first started to, address this issue back in the 70s, people would say to me, those are foreign ideas, that people work. I say, yes, people have always worked, but there's difference between work and labor. So that's, I think, children must work, they go to school, that is work. But in fact, when they do excessive work, which jeopardizes their welfare, right, which leaves them to too much control, makes them too anxious, and endanger their lives, as those children who sell on the streets, by which I started my work, then that is no longer work. It is labor. Yeah. And it's inimical to the child's welfare. And therefore, those are the kinds of work that the Child's Rights Act is addressing, that they should be, something should be done about them. Those work, children should be taken, removed from this kind of work. And one of the worst forms of work, we have child prostitution in several cities in this country. And those are work that are abhorrent, that those children, this kind of work should be prescribed. Children should be moved immediately and allowed to develop, normally.
But when you sometimes talk to kids, I remember, I think it was last year, I was shooting A Peace of Mind in South Africa, and we're talking to young girls. And a young girl of 15 said to me, what else is there to do at a weekend than to hang out and be with a man? And I'm like, excuse me? And unfortunately, that's something that you're going to hear a lot of young people say to you nowadays, is that they're working, they have to survive. I mean, because that is what child labor has turned out to be, that kids are doing these things to survive. Is that really what the African leaders or Nigerian leaders are doing?
But do they survive? Because the child prostitute catches AIDS and dies, so it's not ready for survival. It's just, that kind of work is almost suicidal. A child who says, what is there to do in a weekend but hang out, there's some problems with the value system of that child. Something wrong. Because what ordinary to the decent mind is abhorrent, is acceptable to us. So that's why we have to work on that. What are the values that families endorse? To what extent that the family endorse those values? Because you have parents, even mothers, who encourage prostitution, who say, go and do what, like people who get their children trafficked out to European countries. So X and Y are built houses for their parents. What are you doing? Are you incapable of doing that which other children do? That's really, and I would like to say that that's a typical Nigerian attitude, that most mothers would not want their children to involve prostitution. But you have at the extreme end of that continuum, mothers who are so, I don't want to call it radical, who are just so way out, and they don't care what their children do because of materialism.
I must say that maybe some of these things about being way out is also about the level of understanding and the level of poverty. The mother that sends her child out to do prostitution or to go and live with somebody as a domestic help and send the money home is probably doing that out of total deprivation. She doesn't have any money to feed the child. I mean, for me, when I travel into the rural areas, there's nothing nice about a mother sending a child out to prostitute. But I'm saying, isn't it the level of poverty? There's no social welfare system in Nigeria.
Well, poverty is, is a necessary cause of child labor. Is not sufficient, because not all poor parents send their children out to work, or even let their children go out to European countries to be trafficked and to prostitute themselves. So poverty is a condition, but maybe ignorance also a very important factor. Apart from prostitution, you have children who work as domestics. Their parents will tell you that they worked as domestics too. Now, those parents are not aware of the changing conditions that have made child domestic work now more hazardous than their time. So they believe that their children are participating in the type of work that they participated in childhood. They don't know that the work have changed. If they really knew that work had changed, they would probably not let their children be involved. So they still believe that this work is okay because they did it, it's okay. So it's poverty plus ignorance. One of the things, and also circumstances of the children, I've said this in several public fora, I've not seen a woman who has one child let that child sell on the streets. One child, she ties that child to apron strings, follows that child around. But when she finds 5 or 6 children are expendable, you say, well, say again, having too many children. There's abuse of nature. Nature has been generous to give you 5 children, therefore must you abuse them. So that's another factor. So it's not just poverty alone. So there are people who are, yes, that's right. It's just not, maybe some not thinking enough, ignorance, and also changing value shift that should make things abhorrent, and they are not. People are saying it's okay. That's kind of thing.
A few years ago, there was a law enacted saying that parents should keep at 4 children, and that way at least you would have enough time for your kids. But it also happens, like sometimes when I'm talking to my mom and I say, oh, I don't want more than 2 kids, she says, how can you say you don't want more than 2 kids? It's as many as God gives you. I mean, come on. I can't, and I'm looking at it and I'm looking at value of education now and everything. But that is what you're finding, that the normal psychological, the brainwash of the African mother is to have as many children as God, and I put inverted commas as God, because one day God is going to wake up and say to us, why do you people always blame me for everything, so because one day that's going to happen. So the question I put to you is, do we have to start, isn't it back to that whole thing that I keep saying, that the African mother, the mother must take back control of the home in order to impact on her child, and in the value system of the ancient African mother, not the modern mother who is materialistic, who needs the recent Asoebi or the gold, etc.
You see, there are several issues working against the contemporary African mother. The issue of polygyny, which I've always castigated as a source of problem. You see, polygyny breeds competition and make women do what they want to do. You want only 4 children. Your co-wife has 6. 4 boys, 2 girls. And then the preference for males, right? Yeah. I don't know how we got to it. You have 4 children. Even educated women say you have 2 children. He said, they're only girls. I said, what do you mean only girls? Aren't you a woman yourself, you see? So the preference for male also served this. So you have 6 children, you don't have boys, go until you have 10 children. Then you have 1 boy. Who is going to be spoiled rotten? Because the kingpin, among 1 boy among 10 girls. These are all the problems that I have. So we have to redress that.
We understand that. I mean, being an only girl in 7 brothers, I do appreciate what you're saying.
Right.
Because the truth is, but that is because of the mentality of the home, that it's somebody has to carry on the name, somebody has to take control of the wealth. They don't realize that a daughter or a child, be it a male or a female, is the same, whereby you find that even now it's happening in India, where women are killing their daughters if they have a child that is a girl, because there's a restriction on how many kids they can have. Thank God we haven't got to that stage in Nigeria, but I mean, the problem still remains that the child abuse that is going on now is actually more dangerous, because sometimes you go to the village and you take a child to train, or they are giving your child to train, and then the child is put on a truck somewhere to go out to.
Yeah, but you see, a lot of things are wrong. The mother, the rural mother who gives up the child also needs to be conscientized. You see, sometimes women go to the rural, they don't know them. A well-dressed woman driving a posh Mercedes car go to rural area, and the mother says, I want my daughter to be like you, regardless of what that woman does in the urban area. So this is just ignorance, okay? Gives her daughter to this madam who comes to, she may make promises that she's going to send the child to school. So when the madam takes the child from the rural area and brings her to urban area, regardless of what promises she makes to the mother,
Yes.
she turns the child to a domestic help, domestic servant. I prefer the words help.
Yeah.
And sometimes she gives the child double roles, domestic help plus street trader, and some other things.
Yes.
So that the child's right to education is confronted here. The child doesn't go to school. And then what makes this worse? So the rural mother cannot be excused entirely. Some of them don't follow up their children. In year 2003, I carried out a research for UNICEF in Lagos. We found children who were separated from their communities at 5 years old. They don't even know where they come from. And their parents, for about 8 years, have not come to visit them in Lagos. So what
That
happens?
they don't care? Or?
They have not come to visit them. At the time when their income is due, the agent, the middleman, comes up, collects the money from the employer, takes his own portion, and passes it to the mother. 8 years, the mothers have not come to see their children. So the children wrote me letters and said, Professor, please take us back to our mothers. And it was a very, very heart-rending episode, because some of the children would break down and cry, and what could you do? And some of the people who did an interview with me said that it was a story that they never forget. These are some of the issues. So if you have a child, where is the traditional African mother's love for her children? 8 years you haven't seen this child. And sometimes in some situations, the child runs back from urban area to rural area. The mother or the father sends her back. I say, we don't believe that any mother, especially if the employer is the relation, we don't believe that anybody would ill-treat a child. You see, there's what you call cultural lag. In their time, you couldn't mistreat a child, but now this is happening. So that's why I emphasize the issue of ignorance as well as poverty. So that's why it's important to sensitize parents in the rural area about what's going on in the urban area, so they can see what's going on and then try to prevent their children from going out from rural area. Because once a child tastes urban area from rural area, it's not going to go back. The glamour of the city, the lights, the dazzling lights are there. So the best thing is to prevent their coming out from rural areas, so that they don't become too much attached to urban area and then refuse to go back.
We'll come back to you, and we're going to take some questions from the audience after this timeout. This is A Piece of My Mind. Keep watching. Welcome back to A Piece of My Mind, and we're going to have some audience questions. Please say your name and ask your question.
I'm Chinwe Ikuebu. My question is, Ma, with the present economic instability in Nigeria, what are the chances of survival for the child abuse in the next 10 to 20 years in Nigeria? Thank you.
Well, through economy is very much adversary economy, but that's one of the things we talked about, that if parents are well conscientized, right, if government puts in place some of the things that the international documents say should put in place, okay, especially the issue of poverty reduction, okay, poverty reduction, that the child stands some prospect, has a higher prospect of surviving, but some things have to be done. Poverty reduction is one of the strategies that have been proposed by so many other governments, and the ECOWAS countries have decided that they want to do this. Whether they do it or not is a moot question, but they recognize that they ought to do that. So I agree with you. Poverty reduction will go some way, but there are some other measures. Just even enlightening people will go some way. Okay? And for the sake of, in the case of children who go to school, let the children do legitimate work. In Netherlands, children work. Children can work in a restaurant. You know, they are 15 years old. Okay? But this work is regulated. You can only do like 3 or 4 hours work and close. And your monitors, there are people who are going to inspect you to make sure that you're not being exploited by employers. So maybe we could also do this. Monitored work, legitimate work. That make sure that children also work and survive.
In England, there's the YTS training scheme. Do you think that the youth training scheme is something that can be applied to the Nigerian situation, ma'am?
Which particular training scheme?
Well, that is that youths between the ages that leave school, maybe between the ages of 15 and 16, will go into some form of training in a technical or vocational manner. Do you think that that is a way of maybe mopping up some of these kids that are on the street in a vacuum who may have not been able to get their JAMB results?
That would help. The issue is that we have numbers again, so there are so many children, okay, to be integrated into this program. So the numbers issue is a very big one.
Okay.
Dependency ratio in England is much lower than we have here. But I'm sure we could work out things so that at least some numbers of children, even worse off. I mean, it's a question of half a bread better than nothing. Some children will be helped through this scheme.
I'll take the second question, Evelyn, at the back, please.
My name is Evelyn Zebijay. My question is, what is the reason behind some nation or countries' rejection in child participation rights, especially in Africa, and what's their fear?
Well, right, as I mentioned earlier, you see, of the 4 rights, that is of the survival, development, protection, participation rights is most difficult to implement. Not only in Nigeria, but most adults in traditional societies, you know, the whole issue of children being seen and not heard is still there, right? And because parents have the right to discipline their children, it's very difficult for parents to realize that that child you're disciplining is also a human person with sufficient dignity, that you ought to ask for his opinion. So they think that parents should always tell children what to do, and that children shouldn't respond. But this is a changing view. It's a changing view. When did West himself discover this? It's a changing view that children should also have a voice, have a say in what they're doing. That position is eminently sensible. If you consider the fact that, well, children are our future, we will go one day, it's good. It doesn't make sense for us to start including children from the word go, making them think for themselves, not just passing laws and decisions to them. Making them participate, for me to make, is to prepare children for the future, is to set up some kind of continuity. So I think it's eminently possible. But you have to educate parents. They don't understand. You have to tell them that the world is changing. If you leave it to them, they won't do it. But if you conscientize them, many of them will see reason and begin to you know, include their children's opinions and views and decisions into matters which concern the children. I'm not saying that children should be dictating for parents in matters that concern parents. No, in matters that concern children should have a view. This is the democratic view, one of the principles that undergird the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. That, to my view, is one way. Train the parents, inform them, conscientize them to see that this is the best thing to do. And I believe they'll do it.
Professor Oluka, it's been a pleasure talking to you on A Piece of My Mind, but you cannot leave us on A Piece of My Mind without giving us a piece of your mind.
Well, the one that comes upmost to me is that poverty is not a sufficient reason for children to be involved in child labor exploitative work. And if parents only put themselves to multiple work and allow that child to go to school and realize his potential, that child will come back and help to break the vicious cycle of poverty that is sort of enfolding the parents. But if the parents just let the child just work and don't go to school, they're going to end up being poor for generations. So it's not in the best interest of parents to send their children to work. Parents, get involved with 4 or 5 work as much as you can. Make sure that your children get a good education. And then insist that when they become, when they realize their potential, they'll come back and assist you. I think that's what I want parents to realize, that the other way, putting children to work doesn't solve your problem. It makes you poorer. Because you are poor, your children will be poor, generations will be poorer.
Thank you very much. Professor, thank you very much for coming on Peace of Mind. Thank you.